Hello, AP Lit. Welcome to Unit 5. In this unit, we're really going to kind of get into, obviously, it's poetry, but we're going to be talking a little bit more about the form and the structure of poems, the sounds that the poem makes and the cadence that it creates or lack thereof, and the different forms that we can see of poetry and what those forms say about the meanings and the values associated with it. Let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, in terms of structure, we want to think about our poems in terms of their form as either closed or open. Okay, most poems that you think of when they just come to mind are going to be considered a closed form poem. And so all that basically means is that it has a really predictable pattern. A lot of times we're going to see things that we can expect in terms of the meter or the beat. Perhaps the rhyme scheme is going to follow a certain pattern. The way the lines are orchestrated, the way the lines within those stanzas are orchestrated. And there's certainly a lot of different types of closed form poems. For example, a ballad or an epigram or a haiku or a sestina or a villanelle. And most widely known is going to be our sonnet, which we're really going to dig into a lot initially. So that's closed form. Closed form follows a certain predictable pattern, has a certain amount of lines, has a predictable rhyme scheme, those sort of things. Your open form, a lot of times people call free verse open form. It's going to have much more of an unpredictable pattern. It might still have some patterns, but those patterns are established by the poet, not by, say, a canon that says, we write sonnets or this is how a haiku is written. It's the poet who decides the pattern. So they might decide the rhyme scheme and they don't follow in a certain pattern that maybe, say, a sonnet does. And so that's the difference between closed form and open form, is that the poet decides the pattern if there are any. Closed form, it's a predictable pattern because of the type of poem that it is. And so when we sort of start to dig into that structure, we need to start thinking about, well, what does that tell us about the meaning? Our closed form is going to refer to poems that have that predictable pattern. We already know that. Because it has a predictable pattern, this is going to allow your reader more access to the organization of ideas expressed in the poem. For example, we know in a sonnet, a turn typically happens after line such and such. I will say that even in a closed form poem, it can purposefully be changed by an author. So, for example, William Shakespeare is sort of the master of making words rhyme that don't actually rhyme, because maybe they are slant rhymes or they look alike. They look like they're rhyming, but they don't actually sound like a rhyme. So sometimes, even in your closed form, your poets are going to make some sort of creative liberties. But typically, it's all about the reader is able to make some meaning based upon the structure. Now, open form, we don't have that predictable pattern. So we have patterns that are established by the author. And so what that means is that the author is really going to be emphasizing certain ideas and concepts based on those patterns that he or she creates themselves. Maybe it's punctuation patterns, maybe it's rhyme scheme patterns, maybe it's a certain beat, a meter. And so we as the reader have to read with a very discerning eye to A, figure out what those patterns are, and B, what do those patterns tell us? And so let's dig into our sonnet. Really, we're going to look a whole bunch at the Shakespearean sonnet because that is super, super prevalent. But I want to talk about the three different types. What we need to know about sonnets in general, though, is that all sonnets have 14 lines. They all follow iambic pentameter, so it has that stressed and unstressed meter. Da 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 da. More on that in a minute. There are 3 variants, as you're about to see, and those variants are only based on rhyme scheme. That's it. And then ultimately, that variant is going to have an impact on the structure of the content and the meaning. So the turn is going to happen in a different place in the Petrarchian or the Italian sonnet versus maybe the Spenserian sonnet. Our Petrarchian sonnet is going to have 1 octave. Octave means 8. So it's going to have 8 lines, and it's going to follow the rhyme scheme A, B, B, A, B, B, A, then followed by a sestet. So that's 6. So C, D, C, C, D, C. Or it can be C, D, E, C, D, E, or some variety of that. Typically, the octave is going to pose a problem or ask maybe a question. And then later, that is going to be answered or resolved in the sestet. Our Shakespearean or our English sonnet, which we see a whole bunch, especially with Shakespeare, we're going to have 3 quatrains, so 3 sets of 4 lines altogether. Okay. The rhyme scheme is going to be, your first quatrain is going to be A, B, A, B, so that first stanza. Your second stanza, the second quatrain, is going to be C, D, C, D. Our third quatrain, our third stanza, will be E, F, E, F. And then we'll follow that by a couplet, 2 lines, G, G. Typically, your first quatrains are going to ask a question or pose a problem. And then usually that resolution is going to happen in the third quatrain. And then that couplet is either going to provide some sort of closure, some sort of final conclusion, an aha moment, a summary, something like that. With Spenserian, it's really, really close to Shakespeare, the Shakespearean sonnet, but the quatrains are a little bit more tightly connected. So we have A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, C, D, C, D, and then we have an E, E rhyme scheme. So we're just missing another set of rhymes, and it's sort of tied in a little bit more tightly. But it's still going to follow that same turn question in the first 2, typically some resolution in the third, and then that conclusion in the couplet. Let's dig into our English and Shakespearean sonnet because that's what we're going to do the bulk of our work with here initially. So we know that the English sonnet is called the Shakespearean sonnet. We already know that it has 3 quatrains, which just means groups of 4 lines. And then we have a couplet, which is 2 lines. We already know the rhyme scheme is almost always A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. We know that the message will take a turn, and the shift is either after 8 lines or after 10 lines. We know that already. Just some things to remember in general. I've already said this, but I'm going to reiterate. A sonnet has 14 lines. A sonnet has to be written in iambic pentameter, so it has stressed on stressed, stressed on stressed. A sonnet has to follow a certain rhyme scheme depending on the type, which I just went over with you. A sonnet can be about any subject, but a lot of times it's either about love or nature, so you can kind of expect those 2 things. Sometimes it's about both. A sonnet introduces a problem or a question at the beginning, and then there's a resolution offered after the turn. So we always look for that shift. Okay. And I will tell you that especially when we're reading some of these dusty, musty poems, the easiest way to read is going to be called enjambment. The word enjambment comes from a French word, enjamber, which means to step over or to put your legs across. And basically in poetry, it means just moving from one line to the next without a terminating punctuation mark. So for example, if you look in that first line, you'll see the floor was swept and strewn with rushes. There was no punctuation after the word swept. There was no semicolon. There was no period. So we're going to keep reading. And so you can kind of see with that red line, they put their legs over and they went to the next line. And so reading it in that way, you want to almost read it punctuation point to punctuation point, can certainly help you derive that meaning so much more easily. Enjambment can be defined as a thought or a sense or a phrase or a clause in a line of poetry that doesn't come to an end at the line break, but instead moves on to the next line. And then in simple words, it's just running on of a sense from one couplet or line to the next without a major pause or syntactical break. And then here's your news. So if it's end stopped, if the line break does correspond with a natural break, like a period or even sometimes a semicolon, the line is referred to as end stopped. Versus enjambment, if the line doesn't have any sort of end punctuation, we consider that line enjambment, and the poet is said to be using enjambment, and so we keep reading, okay? And that's going to be the best way to interpret your poem. Just some really quick tips. If I were you, I would pay attention to the type of speech or what they're using in terms of what the line is ending with. Okay. Remember that the whole point of enjambment is that it allows the poem to move and sort of develop a coherence, right? We're just kind of flowing and saying things the way we naturally would. It's directing that reader with regard to form and meaning. So if a line ends with a noun, I want you to pay attention because that's likely a focal point, right? If it ends with a verb, we're inciting movement. So it's something that we do. So what specifically is it that the speaker is suggesting with that verb? If it's an adjective, remember that adjectives are there to add texture. They're there to add detail. So maybe you'll find some tensions and some complexities here. Maybe it's a compound word. So watch for those. Is the last word of the line intended to actually compound with the first word of the next line? That can be some fun wordplay there. And then just other focal word points, just watch for anything that just seems to jump out of the page. There's a reason why the poet wants to draw your eyes to those words. So it's your job to discern and figure out why. We're going to watch this really quickly. So let me press play.
Another term we need to understand is iambic pentameter. It's relatively easy to understand and much easier than it sounds. We saw in another video that Shakespeare wrote in verse and prose. An iambic pentameter is quite simply a form of verse. Pentameter tells us that a typical line will be formed of 10 syllables, and this line taken from Richard II is a good example. So when this thief, this traitor, Bolingbroke, you should be able to hear the 10 syllables or individual vowel sounds clearly. So when this thief, this traitor, Bolingbroke. But a good question to ask is, well, if there are 10 syllables, why is it called pentameter? After all, in Greek, pente means 5, not 10. Well, pentameter actually means that each line is divided into 5 segments, which happen to be called feet, and each of these feet contains 2 syllables. Now, incidentally, this does not mean that a word must be contained within one specific foot. Words often fall into different feet. For example, the 2 syllables of the word traitor fall into feet 3 and 4, whilst the 3 syllables of the word Bolingbroke fall into feet 4 and 5. So now we know why the verse is called pentameter, but why is it called iambic? Well, iambic simply means the pentameter lines are made up of something called iambs, and an iamb is 2 syllables where more stress is placed on the second of those 2 syllables. It's often described as a didum rhythm. For example, the word compare is iambic because there's less stress on com and more stress on pair. Now, if you compare that with the word compare, you can hear that compare is not an iamb. So going back to our line, so when this thief, this traitor Bolingbroke, you can hear that there is more stress on the syllables when, thief, tray, bol, and brook. Now, if as an experiment we reverse this pattern, you can hear that it sounds unnatural in normal English pronunciation. So when this thief, this tray, tore Bolingbroke, so the didum rhythm is the basic pattern of iambic pentameter, and it also sounds quite speech-like in English. So, in summary, verse in Shakespeare's plays is written in iambic pentameter, which is 10 syllables divided into 5 feet, and each foot is an iamb. Simple as that.
Simple as that. All right. You should have been given a poem for Sonnet 130. Make sure that you're on the side that says Sonnet 130, not the side that says Sonnet 18. And so I'm just going to go ahead and read it through one time. Okay, I'll read it through, and then we're going to do some things with it so that we can kind of look at the structure of it. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love is rare, as any she belied with false compare. So the first thing that I want you guys to do is go through and I want you to number those lines. We know that every sonnet is 14 lines, so let's go ahead and do that first. Okay. Whoops, my bad. Then we're going to go through and we're going to label that rhyme scheme. Okay. Now, to label the rhyme scheme, we always look at the last word. So sun. Sun rhymes with what? Well, not red. Oh, but it does rhyme with done. So we're going to put an A next to sun and an A next to done. Anything else rhyme with sun? Nope. So we move on to the next line. Red. What does red rhyme with? Head. So these are going to be B. B. Now, if anything else rhymed with red or head, it would be B, but nothing else does. Okay? So you're going to go through, and then when there's nothing else to rhyme with that word, you're going to start with the next letter. Okay? If you're super stuck, I'm going to give you the answers, but I want you to try on your own in just a minute. Okay? Then you're going to label the quatrains. All you're going to do is bracket them. So we know that a quatrain is 4. So you're going to say quatrain 1, quatrain 2, quatrain 3. And then we're going to label the couplet. And then you're going to try to label the iambic pentameter, stressed, unstressed. I usually use a dash and then like a U for unstressed. You can do any symbol that works for you to indicate stressed and unstressed, but try to go through. Technically, every single one of these lines has 10 syllables. So try to figure out where that stressed and unstressed syllable is. Okay. Take a minute and do this for me, and then we'll go through the answers. All right. Welcome back. Take a look. All right. I want you to compare your answers with mine and see how you did. I have, as you guys can see, I've labeled my rhyme scheme. I have my quatrains. I have my lines. And I have my iambic pentameter labeled. Okay. And then this is just to show you how that structure sort of all lays out. Check your answers against mine. Okay, whoops. We don't want to get that far. My bad. Now what we're going to do is we're going to paraphrase each quatrain. I want you to go through and just say, what is that quatrain mostly about? Okay, put that under number 6, please, where it says quatrain number 1. Summarize quatrain number 1. Now summarize 2. Now summarize 3. Finally, summarize that couplet for me. All right, let's dig into it. So here's what I thought. I thought it said something like, hey, listen, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. They're not bright. We know that coral is much more red than her lips because her lips are kind of dull, right? Not wearing that lipstick. If snow is white, which it is, well, then her breasts are kind of a brownish gray. So her skin is kind of a brownish color. And if she happens to have some black wiry hairs, not super golden and soft. Are you getting a picture of this woman yet? Then he says, I've seen roses decorated with red and white, so streaked, in other words, with pink. But there's no pink in her cheeks. She's either pale or she's dull or no makeup or nothing to make her sort of have those rosy red cheeks. And let's face it, some perfumes smell way better than my girl's breath. She got some dragon breath. All right, next quatrain. I love to hear what she says. So he likes to actually listen and talk with her. But I know her voice isn't super melodic. Maybe she even has sort of a shrill voice that he can't stand listening to. He's like, and listen, let's face it, I've never actually seen a goddess, but I know that my mistress is very unladylike in the way she walks. But then at the very end, so that poses all the problems, right? But then at the very end, she says, and yet I think my love is rare as any woman who has been misrepresented by ridiculous comparison. All right. So take what you can with that. All right. So now let's get into some more. What would you say the big problem is here? So go ahead and answer for me. What is this problem? Now let's talk about those binary oppositions. What do we see opposing each other in this poem? Okay, where's the shift? And then what is that final resolution? What does he resolve at the end about his lover? All right. So, how did looking at the structure of this poem lead you to a meaning of the work as a whole? And what is this meaning of the work as a whole? I want you to answer both of those questions for me right now. Okay. I want you to skip for now. We're going to skip numbers 10, 11, 12, and apparently it starts with 10 again, and then 13. We're going to skip that on this side. I want you to flip your page over, and I want you to work Sonnet 18 in the same way that we just worked this one together. This time, you're going to work it with a partner. So wait for someone close to you to finish this video, and then I want you to work Sonnet 18 together in the same sort of way. This time, you are going to answer the questions at the very bottom. When you're done, go ahead and throw that in the tray for me. I hope you're doing great and have fun digging into Shakespeare.